Well, welcome to this week's HBF. As we begin to focus our minds and dig in, let's start off first of all, just sharing anything that came to mind from Sunday morning's sermon there about the passage. Anything that's ringing around your mind, any thoughts, any memories, any reflections on how God was speaking through that. But why don't we just share for a couple of moments what it means to consider Jesus, the opening words there in verse 1. To consider Jesus. What does it look like for you in your own heart, your own life, to consider Jesus practically? What does that mean for you? So before we dig into the text, before we read together, before we do any of that, let's just share any reflections or thoughts and what that means to consider Jesus in your own life. Okay, let's take your Bibles. Let's turn to Hebrews chapter 3. There's only 6 verses, so let's just read that together and someone pray that God would speak through His Word, and that as we share, as we discuss application in life together, that we would hear from God through His Word. So let's do that together. So this first section, the first point was Moses was a brick. We were looking at the passage there where the writer of Hebrews is drawing into focus Jesus being superior, not just to the angels that we've discussed already, but superior to Moses, the hero of the Hebrew people, the hero of the Jewish faith, a Hebrew of Hebrews. And so the passage really is looking at how Jesus is superior. What we were thinking about in this first point was, if the writer of Hebrews is calling the Jewish people to look to Jesus rather than look into the heritage of their heroes in the past, like St. Moses, faithful as he was but not foundational, a pointer as he was but not the destination, how can we be prone to fall into the same trap? What is God saying to us here in perhaps an enlightened kind of post-Christian world where we don't think of Old Testament heroes as the ones that we worship? But what do we find ourselves prone to holding on to rather than Jesus? I thought about maybe a few things like heroes in the church, those that brought us to faith or shared the gospel with us, those that teach us the word, perhaps me or others that stand on a Sunday morning and preach from the pulpit. Maybe we think about Christian family background, our father or grandfather or mother, or these great people in our family background that we can hold on to and say, you know, I come from good Christian stock. Or maybe even our church identity. We're part of a good church and we hold on to that. And because we're a part of a good church, that we feel like that in some way gives us credibility or access. When what the writer of Hebrews is saying is, don't look to Moses, don't look to your pastor, don't look to your church, don't look to your family background, look to Jesus. So here's our questions as we dip our hearts in the litmus test here. What does that look like for you and me? What does that look like in our own struggles of holding on to other things other than Jesus? What are those things? And maybe how can we help one another to let go and hold fast to Jesus? So if Moses was a brick, Jesus is presented in our passage here as the builder. And he's a builder of a house that is better than the house that Moses was building. Moses was part of the tabernacle in the sense that he was just a priestly function and an apostolic function. He was the one that went in and interceded between God and the people. But it was a house, the tabernacle, that was a picture of Eden. It was a reminder of where they had come from, the lost access to God in the garden. But it was imperfect, and Moses himself was just a part of it. The house that Jesus is building, we're told, is a house where he dwells in and resides over. So he dwells in us by his Spirit. He is over the house, not as a servant like Moses, but as a son. So thinking about the house that Jesus is building, I wonder, what do we think about the church? How do you talk about the church? Do you talk positively or negatively? Do you see the church as a place where Jesus has brought together different parts of the community, those who otherwise would be at war with one another? Remember, I mentioned Ephesians chapter 2, where Jews and Gentiles are brought together and are reconciled. The dividing wall of hostility is broken down in this house that Jesus is building. What does it look like to you when you think about church? Do you think about the people that really get on your nerves, or the systems that really drive you mad, the procedures and protocols and rules about church life? Or do you think about church as the imperfect but the beautiful bride of Christ that Jesus, this painting that he's painting to show the world his wisdom? How about just in this section here, we share some positive things that we love about not just our church, but the church at large, the Big C global church of all its different tastes and colours, all its different bits of texture around the world. Why don't we share what we see in God's manifold wisdom being on display in this better house that Jesus is building? You remember on the back wall in the church, there's all the different bits of wood, different shapes and sizes and colours. All of it come together and make this beautiful picture. Well, we are his house, and I was using that to show that, like Peter says in 1 Peter 2, we are being built together as spiritual stones into a holy temple where God dwells. And this is what the church is. So in this last section, let's think through, what is your part in the church? You may be a bigger stone or a longer stone like me. You may be a shorter, skinnier stone like others. You may be darker or lighter, whatever. You get the point. It's an analogy that all of us are different. We bring something different to the table. But God is weaving it all together into this beautiful tapestry called the church. And you and I are involved. So this final section, I want us to think about, how are we being part of? How are we belonging in this church, this building that Jesus is building? How are you serving? How are you belonging? How are you involving yourself? How are you knowing others? Nagusi and his wife Genek came back to our house for lunch on Sunday. And one thing that they remarked in just their short stay with us, that one service at GBC, is they shared how it was relational. The church were loving and knowing one another, sharing with one another. And others in the room were sharing about how people are often in each other's houses for dinner and going out for coffee and discipling each other in that way. How are you involved? As one ant doesn't make a colony, one bee doesn't make a swarm, one lone Christian doesn't make the church. So what prevents you getting involved, and how are you getting involved? Let's share and then pray for one another as we bring our time to a close.